Welcome to The Call to Create. I'm Betsy Bush. So, you want to write a book? Have an idea for a novel that's been knocking around in your head for a while? Or maybe you've been regaling friends for years with tales of your adventures hitchhiking across the U.S. as a young student from the U.K., and you finally decided to write it all down. That's pretty much what happened with my guest, Graham Broyd. Graham's book, Backpack, Jacket, Surfboard, will be published by Forbes this spring. But Graham has self-published a book as well, and he's going to tell us what goes into writing a book and getting it published. Graham, thanks so much for being here. So tell me about your decision to sit down and finally write this story of your adventures as a 20-year-old in the United States.
Well, thank you, Betsy, and thank you for inviting me here. I'm excited to talk about my new career as a writer.
Right, you've been a banker for a long time.
I have, yeah, and I had no expectation of ever being a writer. But as you correctly said, I've been regaling people for 40 years verbally about the stories when I first came to America. And as I was retiring, I decided it would be kind of fun just to write those down, almost for my own amusement. And my expectations were that if I wrote them, I could send them off to 30 or 40 or 50 of my friends who'd heard these stories over the years, and no one would buy it. I would just send it to them, and that maybe 10 would read it. And we'd have a good giggle.
Sure.
And that would be a fun experience. And so that's where it started.
And then I heard about your revisiting these places that you had originally had adventures in.
Yep.
Around, what, 1980?
1980, yeah. And maybe I'll just set the scene for the book. So I was at university in England, and I won a scholarship to go study at the Library of Congress, which was a very big deal back then.
Sure.
6 weeks, flight out, flight back to D.C., enough for a cheap hotel room and some food and drink while I was out there. And so I was 20. I sold my ticket to D.C. and bought one to L.A. because I wanted to go surf Malibu Beach.
Well, of course.
And I thought to myself, well, I'll surf for a week. I looked at a map, L.A. to D.C. I'll hitchhike across there. That'll take me a week. And then I'll study for 4 weeks in the Library of Congress and come home. That was about the extent of my planning.
Oh, my goodness.
And so, frankly, what happened during those, what ended up being 7 weeks, were a series of about 20 stories that I've told for a long time that are really barely believable until you add some facts around them to make people realize I was actually there and this actually did happen. And one of the reasons I went back, as you mentioned, I went back in April of last year, 2024, was because I had 24 photographs from that trip that were in an old album, photo album up in my attic, gathering dust, and that were posted in chronological order. And some of it made no sense to me. And so I wanted to go back and recreate the trip in 2024 that I'd done in 1980 and try and take the exact same photos from the exact same spot and hope it would trigger, in my mind, why I was there and how I got there and how some of the events actually occurred.
I think a lot of us in that time period, we went to Europe and we did, the train pass, the Eurail pass, and staying in hostels and stuff like that. And I think it's like, how did that happen? How did I get there? There's so much that is kind of lost to time.
Yes.
And you have the random photographs because, of course, you had a camera and film and you had to buy the film and develop the photos. So you weren't taking a lot of pictures, not like now.
So different than today, right?
Yes.
So in that time, I had one snap photo, Kodak Instamatic, 24 shots. And one of the things that was really remarkable to me was how disciplined I was with that camera.
Right.
So the first shot I took was of the air traffic control at LAX, that strange-looking building at the Los Angeles airport. And the last photograph I have is me standing in front of the Statue of Liberty in New York.
Oh, wow.
So I was able to progress those 24 across what ended up being 7 weeks. And one of the stories I address in the book, I went out to Los Angeles, first picture at the airport, and I was on my way to Malibu Beach. Anyone who's seen the news recently will realize that Malibu is just a little bit north of Los Angeles.
Sure.
My second picture was me in a bull ring in Tijuana, Mexico.
How did that happen?
And so that's one of the many reasons why I wanted to go back and think, how the hell did that happen? And so the return, and it's been really helpful for my book writing, the return added new stories to the original stories. And so that's been a wonderful experience as well.
So what you're describing, it sounds really wonderful, and I can tell from the way you're telling this story that you're a great storyteller. How did you come to attract the attention of Forbes to be publishing this kind of what do they call it?
Adventure log.
An adventure, self-discovery or whatever.
Yes.
Both as a 20-year-old and now.
And really, I've found it a remarkable story. I have never had an aspiration to write. In fact, as a banker, I was relentlessly criticized for my terrible writing style. Effectively, everyone in a bank wanted bullet points, short and to the point. And I, as you note, am a storyteller. So my emails were long. They had a start, a middle, and an end.
Well, at least they had an end. But
and so people would point that out to me. And so when I got to this point where I thought, I want to write these stories down and send them to my friends, I thought to myself, I need to learn how to write. Because if I'm going to do this, I want to do it properly. I want to do it well. So I'm going to need to learn how to write. And so I went on some master classes online, Malcolm Gladwell and Michael Lewis, and listened to them. And I thought, oh my goodness, I know nothing. I know nothing about this at all. And then something very strange and serendipitous happened. So there were 2 books that I wanted to write. One was this hitchhiking, and the second one I have called The Forrest Gump of Finance. And it's about my banking career and how I stumbled into, what am I doing in this room? Why is everyone looking at me? Isn't this an important event to be happening in financial history? And somehow I seem to be in this room. And so Forbes became aware, and I'll tell you about how they became aware in a moment, that I was potentially going to write that Forrest Gump of Finance book. And they actually were tracking through social media a few thousand senior corporate and banking people. I was a CEO of a bank in the United States, just to pick up on whether they would be writing something that would fit their genre. This is Forbes magazine, Forbes books. And they picked up from my Facebook posts, from my trip back to California, not that I was writing a book about hitchhiking. They didn't care about that. But that I might also be writing later on a book about my banking career. So I got what I thought was junk mail from Forbes asking if they could have a conversation with me about writing a book.
Yeah, sure, right.
And that triggered a whole series of events that have been just an incredible journey for me in learning that business.
That is amazing. So what did you learn about writing, and how did you go about writing this book, because a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a book, but writing is hard.
Yep.
Right? It means sitting down and actually writing and then going back and saying, oh, this isn't good, I need to redo this, right? The rewriting is often
Well,
harder.
it was dramatic and instant for me. As I say, my basis was that I couldn't write. I was a terrible writer. And so what Forbes did was they said, well, are you going to be writing this book? And I said, yeah, I am. I've written all the titles for that book, but I'm actually writing another book now about hitchhiking. And I kind of smirked because I thought they're not going to have an interest in that. And they said, well, how far along are you in that book? And I said, I'm like 90% done. But I haven't even spell checked it yet. Mm-hmm. They said, well, just finish it off and send it in because it'll give us a sense on how you write. Implication being they'd have no interest in the book. So I was almost embarrassed to send it in. Now, this is Forbes magazine. This is me, my silly little hitchhiking stories across America. But I sent it in, and a week later, they'd set up a call. And 7 people got on the call, which was the first surprise, because they all wanted to see who the writer was, because they all had a picture in their mind of what I was like. And what happened was they told me that as a non-fiction, biographical-based writer, the single greatest skill was to write in your own voice. And I was like, so all those verbal stories I've been telling for 40 years, if I just write those down as they are, that's good? Having been criticized for 20 years as a banker, they're like, oh my goodness, yes it is. And they say, people, you have no idea how non-fiction writers struggle and fight to write in their own voice. Mm. And they said, we can see your arms waving across the page as we read these stories.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, what a moment.
What a moment.
And at that point, they almost had to hold me back to get back to my keyboard. I'm like, oh, I can write until the cows come home
you've
now.
seen nothing yet, right?
And frankly, to your point about, well, it's difficult, I'm sure it will become so. But I've told these stories for 40 years. And so it actually was really easy to write it down once someone had given me the confidence to do it. And then Forbes then carried me through and introduced me to all kinds of issues that I never even thought about in writing a book.
So, and just to put this in perspective, you have already self-published a book.
Yes.
And it's actually a very interesting book about, well, you went to Washington, you got the scholarship originally to study the Panama Canal.
Correct.
And you have since, how long after that, when was this book on the Panama Canal published? And why don't you tell us the title? Because you might as well tell us the title so people can buy it. Right?
Yeah, so it's a book on the Panama Canal treaties, kind of timely today.
Yes.
As you correctly said, I went to the Library of Congress to study the Panama Canal treaties that happened in 1977, right? So they were recent in 1980. And so part of my process for writing my hitchhiking and my finance book was I wanted those books to be really good because I've been talking about them for so long. I wanted that product to be good. So I thought, I don't want that book to be my first book. I thought, I want to try and publish something else first so I can learn.
Interesting.
And so I thought, I'll take my university dissertation, which was just, typewritten. And
well, at least you still had it.
I still had it, and convert that into a book. And I had friends who had self-published on Amazon. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take that dissertation and take that all the way through the process to it being published so I can learn, because my assumption was that my next books, I would be self-publishing. I had no expectation that a publisher would pick me up and sign me to a 3-book contract, which is what's happened.
Yes, wow.
And so I used that as an exercise to learn, and learned a lot.
Yes.
And now look at my Panama Canal book, the physical book, and know what my Forbes published book, Backpack, Jacket, Surfboard, is going to look like. It's going to be dramatically different. Oh my goodness, did I know so little? You know, I got it published. It's out there. It's actually sold a few copies, but the product quality will be dramatically different from my learnings from working with Forbes and their team.
Well, you say you have a Forbes team.
Yep.
So tell us about, because I've never heard this before, what you've told about all the different people who are working on your book.
Yeah, it's remarkable, right? So I guess I assumed you get an editor, and the editor would basically do an advanced spell check, right? Maybe say
grammar.
Maybe don't say that in this paragraph, or you've used this word too many times. Well, I was completely wrong. So I have effectively 4 editors, all with very distinctly different tasks. The most important one in the journey so far has been the development editor. Now, let me tell you what the development editor did for me, because it's been wonderful for me. So I had basically 20 stories for my trip that ran in chronological order. Very easy for me to write. So the development editor basically says, your stories are great. They stand up, they work. There's really nothing we need to do there. And frankly, I would have been against changing them up. They're my stories. But she said, everyone you told these stories to knows you to a greater or lesser degree. You want to sell this book to people who don't know you. So you need to tell them a little bit more about how those stories impacted you, changed you, and how you reflected on them. So we need to work between the stories. And she was a former professor of philosophy at Vanderbilt University. So as I say, she's a woman of substance.
Wow,
right?
yes.
And so she was fantastic to work with. And it wasn't substantial editing. You're talking about adding 3 or 4 paragraphs between stories. And she would make a suggestion to me to expand. She said, you would say something like, well, this had a really positive impact on me. And she said, what positive impact? How? When?
Show, don't tell is,
right?
I think, what they're always saying.
And she said, you need to, just tell us about that. And I'd usually sit down, and one of the almost therapeutic parts of writing was I had to take myself back to 1980 and think through my time then and my thought process then, and then how it had impacted my life over the next 40 plus years. And once I got my mindset into that space, writing became really easy. I'd bang it out, and she would always get frustrated because we'd have twice a week meetings, and I'd be done in 2 hours after our call. So that's the development editor. She really just pulled that stuff out of me in a wonderful way.
Wow.
And also, I think important to share in that process, she would say, I think there's a better way to write this phrase you have. And I'd look at it, and I'd say, okay, I understand what you're saying, but here's the point I'm actually trying to make, so I'm not going to change it. To which her reaction would nearly always be, that's fine, right? It was all my words at the end of the day, and they were very sensitive to that. She wasn't rewriting anything. She was prompting things for me to write. So that's your development editor.
Right.
2 other editors.
Oh.
2 other editors and a supervising editor, right? So once the development work be done, then comes in what I would consider to be the traditional editor, the line editor. They're the ones who then go through and say, is this double apostrophe or single apostrophe? Is there a dash here, right? Is this a semicolon or a colon, right?
The semicolons always throw me off, right?
Right, and so very thorough, but needs to be a different person with a different pair of eyes.
Oh. Yeah. Sure.
Because you and the development editor will have been locked into the narrative. You'll be following the story. So you need a line editor to come in and say, forget the story, is this just correct? So that's the line editor. Once that is done, then they throw it open to a complete third party to do what they call copy editing. And I'll say here, I'm not a literary person. I'm using these terms in the way I use them with Forbes. Other publishers may use them in a different way. People may have different understandings of these words, but this is how it was used with me. So the copy editor then goes in to make sure the whole thing flows from start to end. You know, are you repeating sections in your book that don't need to be done? Does it flow from end of story to start of story? Right? So not developing it, but just to make sure with a new pair of eyes, we get from A to B to C to D in a conscious way.
And these are all the things as a self-published author.
None of that happened.
You don't have any access to
None.
that, right? And you might show it to friends and family.
Yep.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, no, I think it's all. But to have these kind of outside resources, the
Yep.
objective reader
Yep.
is so important.
Huge impact, right?
Yeah.
And I would say the nature of working, particularly with the development editors, you become quite close to them. But then the fourth editor was the supervising editor. So this was a very senior editor and is a very senior editor at Forbes. And she can be the one who's harsh, you know, and you need that.
Because you're going to have readers out there, reviewers, who will be harsh. So,
And she said her role is to be the audience. Her role is to be the reader. Right? And so, you know, that, and she sat over everyone to make sure the end product was going to come out as the reader wanted it to be. 4 editors, right? That's just the start, though.
Okay.
That's just the start. And then all kinds of specialists. Front of book. Front of book? What's front of book?
what is front of book?
Front of book is, well, you know, that page you have inside that has the copyright details. Your testimonials. And who did you get those from, and what did they say? Right? And and who chooses what goes in there? And they need some subtle editing to make them make sense. Right? A lot of people have a nice quote that kind of lands the style of the book in the front. Your dedication, any acknowledgements, a foreword. Right? The author's bio, right? In what order? In what layout? What are you saying? Does it help the book? Right? Does
Yeah.
it lead into the book? Right? All these things, specialist, just to do that.
Sure.
Right?
Right. And was there a fact checker? Was there someone going back and maybe were there like factual details?
Yeah.
That
So
needed to be pinned
the
in?
editors pick up. You know, for instance, if I were to quote, U.S. policy towards Panama or something, well, they would need that attribute. And one of the process I've just been completed in a few days is there's a lot of photographs in there, not just mine, but some others. I need full attribution. Nothing can go in the book without full attribution.
Right.
And so there is someone who takes care of that, who follows up, right, on some of these photographs. Was this a Getty image or an Alamy? And are you going to have to pay for this? Are you going to have to get permission for this?
Yeah.
You self-publish, you might want to take a little risk and put that
Yeah.
out there, and then maybe you get sued or you don't.
Yeah.
Major publishing house, you have no option, has to
Yeah.
be done properly, otherwise it doesn't go in at all. And then even color photographs in a non-fiction paperback, that is actually very rare. And I didn't realize that until I walked into a Barnes & Noble and started opening books and tried to see if there's any color
Yeah.
in a...
Yeah, because they would have to be like glossy inserts.
Correct.
Right?
Well, yeah,
Or-
and in my case, critical that the photographs are in the story. No glossy insert. It has to land at the point of the story.
Right. These are your photographs that you took.
Correct.
Yeah, that are prompting your little
correct.
episodes.
And so, again, critical process. Quality of the photograph. These were 1980 photographs on a Kodak Instamatic. They were stuck in a photo album in my loft.
Yeah.
I'm like, Is this going to be a problem?
Yeah.
Which the answer, again, if it be me self-publishing, probably not a great outcome.
Right.
And their view is, this is a problem, and we will solve it.
Right. I'm sure you can digitize it and
Yes, you do.
enhance it or
Yep.
put it through filters or
Yeah.
something.
And then, of course, there's the cover and the title. Again, specialists who do this for a living, because what happens when you walk into a bookstore in comparison to ordering something you're interested in on Amazon, right? If you're interested in Panama Canal treaties, maybe you go find my book on Amazon. But for a book like Backpack, Jacket, Surfboard, someone's naturally not going to go look for that. That might be nice sitting out in Barnes and Noble.
I can
And so what
picture
does
it.
that what
Yep.
does that cover look like? Right? Critical. And I'd done a cover with a friend who's done covers before that I loved. I thought was fantastic. And so I submitted that to Forbes, and they very politely said, "That's a very good amateur attempt." Said, "But we're a publishing house,
Yeah.
right? And we have our own standards,
Yeah.
and therefore we're going to need you to work." And frankly, they've kept, we're finalizing that process right now, they've kept a lot of the colors, which were critical to me. The colors are the red of my backpack, the yellow of my surfboard, and the blue of the California sky.
Yeah.
And it's a lovely warm feeling to it, which I liked. And they basically said, got it. We can work within that, but now work around there. And then title. My book was always, in my mind, called Welcome to America. However, there's been 5 other books called
Yeah.
Welcome to America,
Yeah.
1 poem, and 1 Prince song.
Oh, okay.
And so they said,
Okay.
sorry, it's not going to be called Welcome to America.
Well, you know what I think is interesting is you can always tell the self-published books because the titles are not great
Yep.
and the covers are not great.
Yep.
And you've got a great title, which is really like, wow, what is that?
Yep.
And the art of book jackets these days is incredible.
Yes, it is.
It's stunning, and you want to like pick up every single book and say like, what is going on here?
Yep.
So going that, going that route is really it's the only way to go
Yeah.
for the book that
You're really
you wanna
passionate
have in a-
about,
yeah.
right? And I think when other people approach these issues, right? So Panama book, it achieved basically what I wanted it to achieve. I was very passionate about this book that I'm writing now. I really wanted it to come out as a finished quality product.
Sure.
And so it's been worth, I finished writing this script in May of last year. And it probably will not be published till May of this year. So that, for some people, and me initially, can be frustrating. That's a long time. I wanted to show the book to people.
Oh, I'm sure.
But in hindsight, once it comes out, boy, am I going to be glad I went through this process.
And honestly, I've heard sometimes it can take longer than a year,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So maybe they're really, advancing it, or you're doing your part.
Well, one of the things that I'm only starting to learn, right, to this expanded team. So that team of Forbes, designated people, 9 people. Right? 9 people. That adds up to 9 people, and all of them working on other books, right?
Sure,
Not just me, but they are designated as my people, and I can reach out to them. Now, I haven't got to market and distribution yet, and as they've made clear to me, one can have an expectation when you've got a professional publisher that's like, "Here you are. I've written a nice book. Please make sure it gets sold." Well, they'll get it onto Amazon and Walmart and into Barnes and Noble, potentially even into an airport bookstore. But someone's going to have to want to buy it.
Right.
And so they've made it very clear to me that this is nonfiction, biographical, and the main character of the whole book is me. And therefore, people are going to have to want to read these stories, because they've heard and met you. So the marketing and distribution is going to be about you. We can support, right? We can put structure around it. We can print some collateral, right? You can take with you to go to a book reading or some such. But this is not going to happen without you. So it's going to be time, right? So I'm now in a process, and relevant for other people looking to write books. If you actually want the book to be sold, which some people, that may not be important to, but if you do, you're actually going to have to put some hard yards in as well.
Yeah, I've heard that publishers are now looking at what is a person's social media, following. Is this person recognized as an influencer or someone with just a wide net of friends and colleagues and whatever? And I think that's something you have, of course, not just in the United States, but in the UK as well.
Yeah, and it's a very relevant question. And the publisher can bring a lot of people and skill sets to help that. I have no desire to be an influencer. I have no desire, to really substantively change my social media profile. I have, as you mentioned, lots of friends and colleagues that I visit across, in my case, LinkedIn and Facebook. But I do nothing on Twitter. I do almost nothing on Instagram. I do nothing on TikTok and have no expectation of doing so. And by the way, if I did, it probably would help. I just don't have the desire to do it.
Yeah.
And so I will supplement a little bit, particularly on LinkedIn and Facebook, a little bit what I do to get the word out. And then, frankly, I have to be in front of people. And so we're spending a lot of time trying to set up book readings, kind of an old art form, to encourage word of mouth, which Forbes have told me is going to be the way, if my book is going to sell, it will work.
Given everything you've described about the team of editors that you have behind you, is there any way for someone who hasn't been able to attract a publisher to maybe self-finance some of these an editorial team or one or two people who would come in professionally and look at the book? Do you know of anything like that?
Absolutely. And I spent some time looking at that, both pre-Forbes and actually during the early Forbes negotiations, because as a business person, I always wanted a comparison. I wanted a competitor. And so you can find all the pieces that I've talked about: copy editors, line editors, development editors, cover designers, title designers, people who do the layout.
Yeah.
People always ask me, how many pages has your book got? Well, it depends what your font size is. Depends where you lay out your chapters.
Sure.
Right? And so, everything has to be done. You can find all those people. You can access them by just Googling. I had lots of conversations with people, good, bad, and ugly. You have to find someone or some people who resonate with you, you think can add value, and are at the right price point for you.
Right.
And so I used, Forbes said, originally we were going to have illustrations, series of 6 or 7 illustrations in this book. And Forbes said to me, we've got professional illustrators, but they said, you may be able to find one yourself at a better price point who knows you. And I tried that, and it didn't really work. And all it did was actually got me to a minimum standard with the work they did that I could then hand over to Forbes and say, professionalize this. So it helped in the process.
Right.
But yes, if you want to do this yourself, you maybe have to project manage it a little bit. Again, it's work,
Yeah.
right? And in my case, the writing became easy. I was loath as someone who had recently retired to take on big project management work.
Right.
And so I was probably more willing and more excited to go with a publisher who'd take care of all these things for me. And initially at the risk of losing some control. Actually, that turned out to be a wrong assumption. I kept all the control.
Because they wanted you. They
wa-
wanted you.
But I didn't know that. I
Yeah,
was nervous I was going to lose
They
it.
wanted what you had to offer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was nervous I was going to lose that. And I think you could lose that with certain publishers and agents. And maybe it's worth just mentioning here, publisher versus agent,
Yes.
right? So Forbes is a publisher.
Do you have an agent?
I do not have an agent. And again, I didn't know this space at all. And through my lawyer, who's in the entertainment business, my manuscript ended up in the hands of a very prominent literary agent, way out of my league. And I thought they would just throw that out immediately. And they considered it for a while. We went to several people, which was very exciting, and then eventually turned it down. Now, an agent will take care of everything for you. It'll be much less, Graham Broyd's going to do this. They would pick the appropriate publisher. And frankly, for my manuscript, and I've always been sensitive to this, my stories of my journey hitchhiking across America is not Forbes' genre. It is not their skill set. Right?
Right. They're more business publishers.
They're business publisher. Now, that's not all they do, and they have equivalent books to mine, but I've always been sensitized to the fact, I'll give you one example. When we were getting the testimonials together, the person who took care of that said, "Do you have any testimonials from CEOs?" I'm like, it's a hitchhiking book. There isn't a CEO of hitchhiking. Right? And that was that person's default. They just got accustomed to business books, and they needed CEOs to give testimonials to the writing.
Well, there might be a CEO who would enjoy the book, and
I think that's possible, right? But what the agent will do will fit a publisher for your writing style, right? And the chances are, Forbes said if that were to happen, that they would bid on it because they liked it so much. But the chances are that I probably would have ended up with a different publisher with an agent like that. And then also the difference is finance.
Yeah.
So everything I'm doing Forbes is joint.
Oh.
Right? So all these 9-person team, I am paying a piece of that along with Forbes.
Okay.
So each of those are financial decisions
Okay. That's
along that
interesting.
journey. And then we share at an attractive rate to me, frankly, the revenues from book sales. And then, I'll have a break even in book sales that'll come from that arrangement. A literary agent covers everything, 100% of everything. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
And to give you a context, and I'm new to this, but I was trying to back into, so if this agent is going to pick me up, how many sales of books am I going to have to make it of interest to them?
Yeah, to even break even, I would think, right?
And you got to remember where I started this. It was send this to 30 or 40 friends and maybe 10 of them would read it.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And I don't know if the number is correct, but the number I came back out with was 10,000.
Oh.
Break even. I'd have to sell 10,000 books for it to make sense for them to sign me up. And once I worked that number out, I sat and waited by my email for the rejection. because I thought there's no way they're going to get to that number. And they actually took a while to get to that conclusion, and then they concluded, wrong time, wrong place for them.
This was the agent who said,
This was the agent,
I don't
right?
think you
but
can sell that
important difference. Notice the difference between the publisher,
Right.
So we have what some people call kind of a hybrid model, where you're involved, in that process. Much higher revenue share on the book sale than the agent. Right? The agent will be taking, more of that revenue because they have to pay their way back.
Sure.
And they'll take more of that revenue until you've sold 10,000 books, and then your percentage will go up.
Interesting. Right? But it sounds like you've really enjoyed being inside this process and learning about all the different roles of all these different people that maybe you would not have had insight into.
I've loved it, right? I've found, the whole thing has been a surprise. This was not an ambition that I was, my ambition was just write this down for fun.
Right.
It was not to become a writer. And so at this stage of my life, to go on this learning journey has just been fantastic. Yeah. And I find every week that I've learned something completely new about the literary field and how it operates and how it works. And I'm just lapping it up, and both in some ways productively for the book, but also separately, even without the book, as just learning and interest and curiosity and stimulation.
Which is so much, I think, of our time of life, right? Where you realize, you look around, it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much that's of interest. And when you realize, gee, I can do this, I think there's something so empowering about that. We're just about out of time, but I want to just talk about the book, because the chapters you sent me, I'm just so impressed with, you have these little episodes that I kind of think of like you're kind of tossing out breadcrumbs for us to follow, and it's like, where is this all going? But a lot of it, at least the section I was reading, you reflect a lot about your father, who was a pilot in World War II.
Yep.
A British bomber pilot.
Right.
And how you have reflected on his life and his journey and all these kind of unbelievable coincidences that have happened in your life that also kind of include your father as well.
Yep.
I think a lot of us at this point can look back and wonder, gee, how did they do that? How old was your dad when he was drafted into the...
Yeah, so thank you for that. And I think it's probably also a point of resonance for the book, right? So a hitchhiking book. So you expect, this bum, hitching rides around America. But what with the book, to supplement the stories, has allowed me a little bit more license to expand, as I said earlier, on some reflection, both on my journey, my family's journey, and on America's journey. I found it very helpful comparing what I found in 1980 to what I found in 2024. One of my chapters, which I know you have read, is about my time in Washington, D.C., and the chapter is titled "The Capital of an Empire," and reflecting on differences between 1980 and 2024. But let me take you back to my father, right? So on this, my revisit trip, I went by to see the Queen Mary, which is the famous British Cunard ship that actually sits off Long Beach, California, as a hotel today. And I always wondered in 1980 why I'd gone to see the Queen Mary when I had so little time in Los Angeles, rather than going to Disney World or going to Hollywood Boulevard or something. I didn't find out till later in life that actually my father had come to the United States on the Queen Mary during the war. It was a remarkable set of circumstances. He'd signed up as a 17-year-old in the war. They knew he wasn't 18 and of age. and they needed pilots to fly new bombers that Churchill had decided were going to be the new Air Force that was going to attack Germany back after the Blitz in 1940. So that my father needed to be trained so that when he turned 18, think about it, 18, right?
That's right.
That he would be ready to fly a Lancaster Bomber at 18 years of age.
Wow.
And so you couldn't learn to fly in England. You get shot down. So they taught them to fly in the United States on airstrips, part of the Lend-Lease that were owned privately, where the private owner was willing to give it up to help. So my father ended up learning to fly in Terrell, Texas. Small town in Terrell, 1,500 people in Terrell, Texas.
Right.
And my father wouldn't talk about the war because he survived it. But he was, we were aware that he had trained in Terrell, Texas. That was about it. When, on my trips, I found out that my father had actually come across to Terrell, Texas on the Queen Mary, a early cruise liner for 2,000 passengers that they put 16,000 British troops on and set it off from Southampton across the Atlantic, but it needed to avoid the German U-boats, the submarines that would have loved to have sunk a named ship like the Queen Mary with 16,000 young British troops on it. So they had to go way north to avoid the U-boats to land in Halifax, Canada.
Wow.
My father, I found out, left on December 23rd, 1942, and probably slept out on deck
Oh my gosh.
in the Northern Atlantic in his Air Force fatigues, right, on a 6-day trip, avoiding German U-boats across the Atlantic before he turned 18 years of age.
It is remarkable, isn't it, when you think about that generation, which is gone now. As a parent, I can't imagine letting my, 18-year-old son or 17-year-old son sign up for war. But everyone in the community, everyone saw their sons go off to war. Your father came back.
Yes.
But a lot of his classmates did not.
Yeah, and you refer to, again in the story, he showed me once a picture. He left school at 16, and he showed his annual class photo, about 21 boys, of which 4 or 5 made it to the end of the war. That would have meant they would have made it to their 21st birthday. And my father made it, and his friend Alec, who showed me around the Queen Mary, made it, and they forever felt guilty that somehow they had survived and their friends had not. So that's 15, 16, 17 of the 21 16-year-olds made it to their 21st birthday, and none of them had any question in their mind that the single most important thing they needed to do was to serve.
Wow. There's so much to reflect on. And this was just a little bit of your wonderful story about hitchhiking in the United States, which involves a lot of, the family history, but also amazing coincidences. I'm not going to give things away. You had a wonderful outcome, but I'm not going to give anything away because I want everyone who's listening to buy your book when it comes out.
Bless you.
So, Graham Broyd, thank you so much. And look for Backpack Jacket Surfboard coming out from Forbes Publishers by Graham Broyd, coming out sometime this spring, early summer.
Hopefully in May. We'll see
Hopefully.
how that process goes. And thank you very much for your time. It's been a joy being here.
Oh, this has been great, Graham. Thank you so much.